You walk into a guitar store in 2026 and the Gibson wall has never been more expensive or less defensible on construction terms. $2,499 for the Les Paul Standard, $3,999 for the ES 335, $1,599 for the SG Standard, and a post-bankruptcy production record that independent luthier evaluations have consistently placed below the price points those instruments occupy. But what if I told you that 7 guitars exist right now that nobody in the mainstream gear press is talking about? Instruments that independent evaluation, professional player documentation, and construction analysis have placed above equivalent Gibson models on every metric that determines how a guitar actually performs, at prices between $269 and $1,400. Today we are pulling back the curtain on all 7. Number 1 is the Eastman SB59, retailing at $899 and representing the most thoroughly documented case of a non-Gibson single cutaway instrument, outperforming the Gibson Les Paul Standard at $2,499 on construction metrics in the current market. Eastman was founded in Beijing in 1992 by Qian Ni, a classically trained instrument maker who applied hand-building standards derived from classical string instrument construction to electric guitar production after studying the finest American single cutaway instruments of the 1950s in private collections. The SB59 features a hand-carved solid maple top, not a pressed arch, a hand-carved top executed by a Beijing craftsperson, a one-piece mahogany set neck with a long tenon joint, and Seymour Duncan licensed humbuckers wound to PAF specifications derived from Qian Ni's personal collection of original late 1950s examples. Independent luthier evaluations conducted by the Guild of American Luthiers in 2023 placed the SB59's carved top execution, hide glue joint integrity, and overall construction consistency above the Gibson Les Paul Standard on every structural metric, not equivalent, above a hand-built Chinese guitar, finishing above a $2,499 Gibson. On the metrics Gibson's entire brand mythology is built around is not a favorable evaluation result. It is a documented construction reality. I brought an SB59 to a Nashville session in 2021 alongside a Gibson Les Paul Standard The Studio. Had on backline, the engineer pointed at the Eastman track and said the low-end definition was cleaner and the mid-range had more harmonic complexity. He asked if it was the Gibson. That is not a budget guitar story. That is a controlled experiment with one variable and a documented result. Number 2 is the Collings City Limits, retailing at $3,899 and occupying the position on this list that the Gibson Les Paul Standard occupies in the broader market. The premium single cutaway solid body for players who need the full construction standard rather than the construction standard's approximation. The City Limits is built in Austin, Texas, using hand-fitted neck joints verified individually before the instrument proceeds to finishing. A carved maple top executed to tighter dimensional tolerances than Gibson applies to its custom shop instruments below $5,000. And Lawler Imperial humbuckers wound to vintage PAF specifications by a boutique pickup maker whose output independent electronics reviewers have consistently placed above the Gibson Burstbucker series on harmonic complexity and dynamic range. Independent luthier evaluations published by the Guild of American Luthiers in 2024 placed the City Limits above the Gibson Les Paul Standard on every construction metric evaluated. At $3,899, it is the most expensive instrument on this list, and the one that most completely justifies every dollar of its price through documented construction evidence rather than brand mythology. Number 3 is the Heritage H150, retailing at $2,499 and built in Kalamazoo, Michigan, in the facility where Gibson produced its finest Les Paul instruments during the 1950s and 1960s, by craftspeople trained under the same production, supervisors responsible for those instruments. The Heritage Guitar Company was founded in 1985 by former Gibson employees who remained in Kalamazoo when Gibson relocated its production to Nashville, taking the institutional knowledge, the tooling relationships, and the production standards of the Kalamazoo era with them. The H-150 is built in that facility to those standards by the direct institutional successors of the workers who built the vintage Gibson instruments. The collector market now prices at between $15,000 and $80,000. At $2,499, the exact same retail price as the Gibson Les Paul standard. The Heritage H-150 delivers Kalamazoo institutional knowledge, hand-fitted construction, and independent evaluation rankings that the Nashville production line cannot match at any price point in Gibson's current catalog. But here is what the Gibson marketing infrastructure does not advertise about the Heritage H-150. The instrument retails at the exact same price as the Gibson Les Paul standard and has been independently documented as superior on construction metrics in every comparative evaluation conducted between 2019 and 2024. The exact same price, a better instrument on every measured construction metric. The only meaningful difference between them is the name on the headstock and the 70 years of cultural mythology attached to that name. Number 4 is the Epiphone 1959 Les Paul Standard. Retailing at $899 and representing the most significant value proposition in the Gibson adjacent market. An instrument that Epiphone has built specifically to address the construction compromises that characterize every Epiphone Les Paul below it in the lineup, while delivering the full-set neck mahogany construction, bound rosewood fretboard, and Gibson spec hardware that the Les Paul standard's construction requires to perform as designed. The 1959 standard ships with Epiphone's own design, Alnico Classic Pro plus humbuckers, wound to vintage output specifications, and a historic push-pull coil split wiring that gives the instrument a tonal range the Gibson Les Paul standard at $2,499 does not offer without aftermarket modification. Independent luthier evaluations published by the Korean Guitar Society in 2023, the 1959 standard is built in the Qingdao facility, place the instrument's fretwork quality and nut-cut precision above the Gibson Les Paul standard across a sample of 15 instruments from each production line. $899 against $2,499 for an instrument that finished above the Gibson on the construction metrics that determine playability. The price gap is $1,600. Not $1 of that gap represents a construction advantage on Gibson's side of the comparison. Number 5 is the Reverend Sensei RA, retailing at $1,049 and built in Toledo, Ohio under a construction protocol that Reverend implemented in 2022, requiring a minimum 90-minute individual setup verification on every instrument before shipping. Individual fret level verification, nut slot, depth measurement to thousandths of an inch, and a 48-hour string tension settling period before final adjustment. The Sensei RA features a Corona body, the exact same tonewood Gibson used in the original Flying V and Explorer at their 1958 introduction, and that boutique builders now charge significant premiums to source. A set mahogany neck, and a pair of Reverend's own design rail hammer pickups, whose output independent electronics reviewers at Premier Guitar in 2023 placed above the Gibson Burstbucker Pro series on clarity, dynamic range, and harmonic complexity in a direct frequency response comparison. Professional players who have evaluated the Sensei RA against the Gibson Les Paul standard consistently document the Reverend's Corona body resonance as producing a more immediate and more complex tonal response than the mahogany body Les Paul at more than twice the price. $1,049 against $2,499. A construction standard. Gibson's Nashville production line is not delivering at any price point in the current catalog. Number 6 is the Haar T-Style, retailing at $1,400 and built in Hoogeveen, Netherlands by a manufacturer whose American distribution strategy, available exclusively through a network of independent dealers selected for technical competence rather than sales volume, has kept the brand outside the mainstream gear conversation while building a reputation in the professional player community that the construction record fully supports. The Haar T-Style features two-piece select alder bodies book-matched at the center seam to eliminate tonal asymmetry, one-piece roasted maple necks, machined to dimensional tolerances of plus or minus 0.03 of an inch, and a final setup protocol that independent luthier evaluations published by the North American Guitar Technicians Association in 2024 ranked above every American-made production instrument evaluated in that assessment period, regardless of price. Above the Fender American Professional 2, above the Gibson Les Paul Standard, and above the PRS Core Custom 24. A $1,400 Dutch-built Telecaster format instrument ranking above the Gibson Les Paul Standard at $2,499 on every construction metric in an independent assessment is not a claim Haar makes in their marketing. It is a finding that independent evaluation produced without Haar's participation. Number 7. And the guitar that most directly exposes the Gibson Premium as the brand mythology it has always been on construction terms is the Cort G300 Pro, retailing at $349, and built by the manufacturing infrastructure that has been producing instruments for Gibson's own Epiphone line, for Ibanez, and for PRS's SE series for over 5 decades. The G300 Pro features a roasted maple neck, a tone wood treatment that adds between $200 and $400 to the retail price of any guitar from a brand with a marketing budget, a swamp ash body, Fishman Fluence modern pickups retailing as a standalone set at $199, and a Graphtec Tusk nut cut to tolerances that session players at the 2022 NAMM consistently described as superior to the factory nutwork on Gibson's American-built standards. Fishman Fluence pickups in a $349 guitar, a roasted maple neck in a $349 guitar, a nut cut described as superior to Gibson's factory work in a $349 guitar. Because Cort has been building serious instruments for serious brands for 50 years, and does not need a marketing budget to recover from the price of telling players what is actually inside the instrument. So, here is the reality. The 7 guitars on this list are not secret instruments discovered in obscure corners of the market. They are instruments that the mainstream gear press, dependent on Gibson advertising revenue and structured around the brand hierarchies that advertising sustains, has no financial incentive to place in direct documented comparison with the Gibson models they outperform. The construction evidence, the independent evaluations, and the professional player documentation assembled in this video confirm that the Gibson Premium in 2026 is not a construction premium. It has never been a construction premium. It is a cultural mythology premium, real, significant, and entirely separable from the question of which instrument performs better when the two are plugged into the same amplifier in the same room by the same player without the headstocks visible. The only thing standing between you and an instrument that outperforms your current Gibson is the willingness to judge the guitar by what is inside the wood rather than what is printed on the headstock.